right, here we are, episode 3 for the Bioactive Nexus podcast. I'm Dr. Bill, and have with
Hi,
me,
Professor Gene.
yep, Professor Gene is here. And we had to reschedule from Friday because you know how it is when you're traveling to the shows. Yeah, you were at Supply Side East last week, right, Gene?
I was at Supply Side East, and I was in Newark, sitting there waiting for my flight, and I looked at my mobile boarding pass, and it told me to schedule another flight because I couldn't make my second flight. So I had to reschedule for the next day, and unfortunately, that fell right in the middle of our planned podcast time. So here we are today.
Glad to have you. All right, so we're going to get started today, and if you miss a little housekeeping and some updates on lots of updates here, and actually a part of that updates, Gene, you could maybe give a kind of just highlights of supply side East that you saw there. That would
Sure.
be cool. Anyway, so again, make sure you follow us on the Bioactive Nexus LinkedIn page, okay? And then also check out our website. There's numerous updates on there. Quite a few changes actually in updates, not changes, but updates. For example, I've sent a message about this earlier, but we are being hosted on Spotify now. Spotify got into traditionally for audio, right? And people use it for streaming music and that kind of stuff. However, they've got into the podcast just like YouTube did a year and a half ago. In fact, Google Podcasts, most podcasts are audio. Google Podcasts is going away in July because they own YouTube, right? Those guys own the same platform. So now they're migrating everything to YouTube. So if you were on Google Podcasts, I didn't set us up on Google Podcasts because it's not going to be there anymore. So, and everything's moving towards video podcasts. So we're in the right time and right place, Gene, for kind of doing this. But so we're streaming on Spotify. So as soon as post-production's done on the show, it'll go up to Spotify, and that will go out through RSS distribution to Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, also quite a few other platforms like Castbox and Pocket Cast or whatever. So people who are into podcasts know what these apps are or platforms. But you can go to the media page. It's new on the website and see all the links to the various platforms there that are going through RSS distribution. So pretty exciting. So we're growing our footprint, and I just set us up with TikTok. So eventually we're going to be up there and streaming there as well as Facebook. We have a Facebook page. Instagram, we're attempted to set that up, but Instagram froze my account because I don't know why, because I was just trying to set it up.
How dare you?
How dare! So it's like I complained about that and said, "Hey, look, I'm just trying to set up." So eventually, we'll be on all these social media platforms, and we'll have little clips, that we can send out and stuff like that. And our goal is to, we're obviously streaming LinkedIn primarily. This is where our primary industry audience is for all of us that follow Gene and I. However, we want to. This is obviously for everybody, so that's why we're going out with a bigger footprint and gain more followers there. So all that's pretty exciting. And again, don't forget to send your questions and ideas to us by email, or you can send us a message on LinkedIn, either Gene or I. And for sure, share the podcast. Tell people about it, and so we can grow our audience. So we're growing our, 2,000% growth on following now, and which is kind of exciting. So every week it kind of goes up. So this is very cool. Anyway, so that's it for the updates. Gene, you tell us about Supply Side East. You were out there. How was that, man?
Yeah. Well, Supply Side East, for anybody who's gone to the Supply Side East and Supply Side West shows, knows is that Supply Side East is substantially smaller than Supply Side West. You're at Supply Side West, you can take the full 2 days and walk around and still maybe not hit all the booths. Supply Side East, you can spend an hour and a half and have walked the show twice. So, much smaller, but also gives you the opportunity to have more quality conversations. I had certainly a number of those quality conversations, plus I was on 2 panels there, which were quite enjoyable. Now, as I walked the show floor, and I tried to see, is there anything new? Is there anything exciting? I can't say that there was a tremendous amount that was new and exciting at Supply Side East, but I did note a couple of trends from just what I could see walking around. One we're going to be addressing as a topic in today's show, and that is Probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics were trending. You could see a lot more booths, a lot more raw material
Yeah.
suppliers that didn't necessarily specialize in those that were now taking some of those types of nutraceuticals into their production list. So that was interesting to see. Not a big surprise, but just as the topic of our previous one of the topics of our previous podcast, I was seeing a lot of different magnesium salts that were out there, and that was going. Other things, categories, again, not huge areas of surprise where you saw some, cognitive related products, a little more focus on some unusual things like gamers, cognitive products, that sort of thing. But overall, I wouldn't say there was any big surprises or anything that I thought was amazingly unique. I tend to see that more at Supply Side West. But nevertheless, it was interesting.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think I might have been to supply side once or twice in my
Yeah.
career. I don't, because it's always smaller, and West is my preferred show to go to. But I heard a lot of people say there was some good things from this East this year, so that's kind of cool. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So good to hear that. So that'll take us right into. Let's take it right into our first hot topic. Microbiome. Okay. Well,
Microbiome. Oh, yeah.
and what is so? This is going to kick off a series on microbiome. So, in my previous position, I was our biotics lead for our team. So, a lot of research in that area in the last couple of years. Myself, in terms of its growth, and that sort of thing. It's definitely the target for if you're doing any kind of product innovation in the space here. You should be thinking about something in that area because that's definitely where a lot of the research is going. So right now, the global probiotics market, this is not including postbiotics or other things which are part of that. Although maybe it's probably lumped together in the markets. I don't think they've segmented it out because there's not enough of like postbiotics on the market. People just think of
Right.
probiotics as biotics, right? So right now we're looking at in 2022 was a $77 billion business with 14% growth expected year over year from 2023 to 2030. So that's double-digit growth in a huge segment, and definitely something to consider. If you're not playing in that space, maybe you want to. The prebiotics market, there's some data on that. Is the size of that is 6 billion. That's as of 21, but it's got like 15% growth, so double-digit growth from 22 to 23. They're looking at CAGR for that, so that's pretty exciting. And a lot of major players in that space, like Nestle, Danone, ADM. They're all big guys in that company. And actually, just at the beginning of this year, CHR Hansen merged with Novozyme, and now it's Novanesis, actually. I have a hard time pronouncing that name. I talked to the guys at Novozyme. I was like, I can't pronounce it. I want to say Novanensis, but it's Novanesis. So it's two Danish companies merged. It was a big merger in the space. So for sure, and all these companies are doing a ton of research in this area. Huge growth in the sector. But I thought what would be good is to at least start off this series. My intent is to dig into different indications and particular strains and really get in deep dive into the science. But before we do that, I think we need to cover some basic definitions and this information's out there. You can go look it up. But for those that haven't taken the time to do that, we'll do that today. We'll go through some of the basic definitions, Gene, and just kind of educate people on what biotics means. Now, in fact, we were using the term biotics for a couple of years ago, but now the industry is starting to use that term biotics to mean the umbrella term for probiotics, prebiotics, synbiotics, postbiotics. And so we'll talk about those and some definitions and get into that a little bit. I think most consumers for sure know what the importance of microbiome. They've heard it now. It's a lot in the news these days, and also probiotics. They certainly know about that. All right, people buy kombucha or yogurt or whatever. They're
Sure.
familiar with probiotics, and then, of course, I think the primary indication that most people think probiotics are for, and there's probably a lot of consumers that don't know that it's for other benefits, but digestive health is the first that comes to
Digestive health,
mind.
or maybe immune. I mean, I remember when
Yeah,
the yogurt company years ago said, "Oh, 70% of your immune system is in your gut," and which
exactly.
is true. And so people, I think those are the two things. It's kind of like digestion, gut, and immune.
Right. Yeah, immune came at second, I'd say, in terms of consumer awareness, in terms of indication. So,
Agreed.
yeah, first digestive, which are all still big areas, by the way. And you're right, you said it, 70+% of the immune receptors are in the GI tract. So this is really important. So if you got a healthy microbiome, I even just saw news yesterday that talking about healthy microbiome and minimizing the symptoms for Parkinson's disease. Okay, there
Sure.
was some research on that. So imagine
Yeah.
that. So it's super super important to have yeah, a healthy microbiome. And okay, so what does that actually mean? Okay, the gut microbiota or healthy microbiome. What does that really mean for us? If you let's kind of talk about this in general here, right? So we have, I don't know how many millions and millions of different organisms, that microbes that are found in our gut, especially in the colon. So like 90 to 90%, 95% of microbes are found in our gut. So in fact, there's more of those than there are other things in our body, than more than anything. And nobody's mapped out what a healthy microbiome is. Nobody's done that yet because it's too difficult to do, too
Yeah, and
complex.
and the fact is, there could be more than one model of a healthy microbiome, depending upon the
Yeah,
areas of the world that you're in, and
diet.
your cultures and diet and all of that. Sure, and
Yeah,
there could be
yeah,
more
yeah,
than
yeah.
one. It's not a one size fits all per se.
It's definitely not. And I can give a personal example of experience for this is that, obviously I grew up in the American diet or whatever, but then, my wife's Mexican and we lived quite a lot in Mexico here. And when I first came to Mexico, I love cheese, right? So I thought, okay, I have new cheeses, right? Oaxaca cheese, panela cheese, whatever. But as soon as I ate all those,
Your
my
body was telling you, "Hey, buddy,
you're not used to this kind of cheese here.
no," and I'm gonna make sure you know it.
Yes, we'll spare you the gory details, you know, at first my thought was like, oh no, it's the water or whatever. No, it's not that. It was actually the diet. It has to do because you said a good point there. Your culture, your diet, wherever you grew up, whatever you lived in. This is what's basically mapped out your microbiota of what you
Right.
eat and those sorts of things. And yeah, you can modify and change all that for sure. No question about that. But then when you start introducing something that doesn't agree with you, if you've traveled a lot or you've eaten other foods in other parts of the world, then sometimes you experience that, and that really has a lot to
Oh
do
yeah.
with your body's not used to that, and it goes. I believe it just goes down to the microbes and things that are there. Doesn't mean that the cheese was bad because you
No.
know or anything like that, and I learned not to test the waters on that anymore. But so so what do the microbes do in our gut? Well, they help us harvest energy from the foods. They improve the gut motility and function, right?
Hmm.
Reinforce the gut barrier so that and again we talked about the immune system, so they protect against pathogens, right?
Right.
So that's why the receptors in our GI tract, so it can do that. They also produce metabolites that are important for health as well, and they
That's right.
synthesize vitamins and hormones. So all that in our gut is what's happening with those microbes. So you imagine it's a very complex system. It's not so simple that okay, if I take this one probiotic or I take these 10 probiotic combination, I'm going to change my microbiota. You know,
Right.
um,
It's like saying, "Oh, this vitamin is good for me. I'm going to take this vitamin, and it's going to change my health in all ways." Of course, it's good for you, but health is a whole lot more than taking a single supplement. And it's the same thing with just as you say, with your microbiome. It's you know a number of factors that are coming into play. It's certainly the probiotics you get, but it's also, to a very large extent, the foods that you eat and the prebiotics that are naturally occurring in that lend themselves to a healthy gut environment.
Exactly. And so outside the gut, it bolsters the immune system, influences brain, liver, kidney, skin, and vaginal tract function. So these are all important things. It has so many applications within the body. And like I said, produces and modulates hormones and affects circulating blood lipids, okay? Um, so if you're sometimes things get out of whack, maybe with food you eat or whatever, or also taking antibiotics, right? Because then that can kill off some of the good bacteria. Now you have good and bad bacteria. There's a balance there within your gut, right? Within that GI tract. So um, eating more of the good things or things that feed the good gut, that's where prebiotics come in. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But you want to eat a diverse range of foods, okay? Obviously, Gene, we talk about this all the time. There's no miracle pill. You need to eat a healthy diet, you need to exercise, you need to do other things. We talked about this in our first show quite a bit, and maintain a healthy weight. All these things are really important. And actually, it changes. Your needs change in different life stages as well. So just like everything else with aging, things change within that. In fact, I even know some other research I remember reading was that take lactose intolerance, for example. So
Sure.
people that were never lactose intolerant when they were younger suddenly develop that. And that's because your body produces less of the enzyme that breaks down lactose. And guess what? You have sensitivity to that later in life. Some people do anyway. I don't know what the percentage is, but it kind of makes sense.
Well, I have found I mean, listen, I think I've always been lactose intolerant to some extent, but I used to be more tolerant. And as I've aged, I have found that I'm more and more intolerant to dairy in general. I think it goes probably beyond just the lactose, dairy proteins too. But yeah, I can't even. I used to be able to do a little bit of cheese. Now I got to be so careful, otherwise I pay the price. I'll spare you the gory details. But yeah, you're right. I definitely have to be very careful about that, and a lot of people do too.
Yep, exactly. So tons of research in this area, of course, and numerous areas. You name it. I think there's research being done with different strains. There are several companies that develop their own strains. So let's talk about basic definition. So when you look on a supplement facts panel on the label, you'll see a genus and species like Lactobacillus brevis. That's the genus and species of the organism, or Bifidobacterium, whatever, something else. So that's basically what's required in terms of labeling and supplement facts. But then you'll see the trade name that's attached to these, usually at the end of the name of the organism, SBL88 or ST something, whatever, or HD,
Right.
whatever. Yeah,
And we're going to say that's the actual strain. So
right.
we want just as I know you're probably going to say this anyway. So if I'm
Go
stealing your
ahead.
thunder, you can slap me. But yeah. So it's just that. So you got um, genus, species, and then strain. And the strain you could have several of the same species but different strains. And there can be subtleties there that do make a difference. Well, most importantly, the strain is what they did the research on. So even if the other one that's the same species
Yeah,
does the same thing, if they haven't done the research, they can't make the claim. So if you're formulating a product, you got to make sure to use the correct strain that was shown in the research
exactly.
to have that effect. And so, yeah,
Exactly.
for sure.
And a lot of these strains, while we're on that topic, have more than one benefit too. I mean,
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you think about clinical study design, and I've seen this with a lot of major companies, screening their different biotic ingredients and looking at the research, maybe for a particular target, like let me use the example of stress in the mental wellness area, right? So they're looking at stress, which this is a big area for consumers. So stress affects a lot of things. GI distress, that it can affect all these different things. It can give you diarrhea, all that. But more than that, um, so it's not that it's how do I say it? It's not that there isn't research in the other areas like sleep or mood or cognitive function. It's just that wasn't the first indication that companies looked at when they're doing the research. So I've seen this where they focused on stress for the research primary outcome, but then they saw secondary outcomes for mood, for sleep. And this makes sense, okay? So when you're thinking about a strain for in the mental wellness area, for example, I've done a lot of research in this area, then of course it's probably going to be good for multiple indications there because of that. But then that's when you got to go back to the company, wherever you're sourcing from, say, hey, you got your research in this area. And usually they've got secondary outcomes they're looking at. I think companies are getting smarter in terms of the research and kind of taking a broader swath at that so that they can look at multiple indications. In fact, I know one company that saw secondary outcomes from sleep and now have done a primary study on sleep with the same strain. So again, the strain is important, which is a genetic difference that's been developed by that particular strain for the company. In some cases, invested quite a lot of money to develop that strain. And just because you take the same genus species of that particular organism doesn't mean you're going to get the same benefit. Quite likely, probably not. One last thing I wanted to say about that is that, and this is a topic I know that's just beginning to be discussed in this area, is that if you think about it, primarily probiotics were the first ingredients on the market. So probiotics are the live organism, which everybody knows, right? And so there's a reason they're in capsules or refrigerated, in the case of yogurt, for example. There's one reason for that, and that's because they're live organisms, right? So you can't take a probiotic and make it into a tablet, okay? Because you're just killing the organism. And this is why there's a huge overages and different, and there's limited in dosage formats here too. So think about it, if you're in a liquid environment or a gummy, which is a type of a liquid environment. Gummy has high heat. So a lot of these strains, you have to research a little bit more than that. You have to see if they're resistant to the acid in the gut, they make it to the small intestine, right?
Yeah. So you were just mentioning tablets and overages. So I was with a company at one point in time, and they were doing a like a lozenge kind of thing that was meant. It was a probiotic for oral hygiene, for oral health, and it was meant to dissolve in the mouth. But and there were studies showing effectiveness there, but the issue was you had to use like 5 times the label claim in order to have sufficient amounts of that be sustainable. 5 times. So if it was like 100, if it was like let's just say it was 100 million, you'd have to use 500 million. It was one of the, actually it was much higher doses. But so yeah, that's one of the things to keep in mind. And the other thing is, from a formulation standpoint, you have to be really cognizant of the fact that probiotics don't play well with others all the time. So if you say, oh man, I want to mix this with some other herbs and whatever, you got to make sure they're going to play well together. Because if you just have a slightly higher moisture content of any other nutraceutical, and you've combined it with a probiotic, that can activate the probiotic, and consequently it dies off before the person even gets a chance to use it. So you have to be very sure that what you're using and what you're using it with will work together. And of course, there are some probiotic strains that are much more hardy for one reason or another.
Yeah. And you raise a good point. Let's just go through each of the different biotics. Let's start with probiotics first. So,
sure.
Probiotics is the most common of what people know for digestive health. There's a lot of products out there for that, and also immune support. So, but one thing that I've always pondered is that when you go buy a product on the shelf, if I see, first of all, I see something in a gummy, a probiotic, or in a tablet, I steer away from that, because unless they've got the right strain that's heat and moisture resistant or whatever.
And I will just mention that if you're using something in the Bacillus genus, which is the spore forming ones, there are some that I know of like a Bacillus subtilis DE111 that Santa Cruz Nutritionals actually did a nice stability study on, and it was real stable over 24 months. But that's because of that specific one. In general, though, you're right. I would avoid in most cases unless it was the right one.
exactly, and that's the only one that I know of actually that can hold up in that kind of format, I guess. But
Well, that has been shown to
shown to
successfully hold up.
anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but it raises a good point that I've often thought about, and it's like, okay, I get this probiotic, and it says this, the labeling requirements change. It used to be that people would put CFUs or colony forming units, right? That's the looking at a petri dish, it's like 60 billion, right? Whatever, the CFUs, and that's what would go in the supplement facts. But well, now that's changed. You have to do weight, so milligrams or grams in this case, probably of the material, and then somewhere outside of the label you can talk about CFUs or whatever, because this is what the consumer is most used to seeing. And by the way, the higher CFU count doesn't necessarily guarantee more is better in this case.
No.
In some cases, it's very targeted for particular strains. You have to look at the research again, and this is a very complex landscape. There's no simple way to go at this. You really have to do your homework here and dig into it, especially for innovation. And also, imagine for the consumer how difficult that is, because they are only really know CFUs as a kind of a measurement. But how do you know that that's the right number for that particular strain, especially if it's in a combination of 10 other strains?
That's right. And I would just add, for those of you out there who are like, hey man, I'm gonna create some of my own probiotic supplements, and you're going to add them to your line. That's fine, but just make sure you have somebody on your staff or somebody that you consult with who knows their business. Because those of you who make your supplements based on marketing science and you just basically copy somebody else's and whatever, you really don't want to think about doing that with probiotics, because you may just end up with a dead product that doesn't do anything and isn't going to make anybody happy. And you're going to get no repeat sales.
Well, and actually, I really believe, I didn't get to my pondering thought here. If I take probiotics and it says 60 billion CFUs on the label, and I only get 30 billion, the other 30 billion are technically postbiotics that are dead. So there are benefits from postbiotics. So you have to ask, you have to think, and no one's done the research. And I know a couple companies are starting
That's interesting thought.
to try and separate that out, because how much of the benefit is actually coming from the probiotic or the postbiotic of that probiotic, right? So it's true. There's real benefits from postbiotics.
That's a very interesting point. I mean, certainly, and this is a good time to mention to anybody who didn't know what a postbiotic is, that we might just define that as, well, there's kind of like two definitions that are used, but basically it is a heat killed or thermal killed or whatever,
right?
Zombie probiotic, where you take the organism and kill it.
It's when the cell walls break apart and then release the matrix of metabolites there,
Right.
Exactly.
And but in that form, it has benefits still.
Yes.
And most importantly, that there's human clinical research demonstrating that it has benefits still.
Yep.
Now, the other way that postbiotics have been defined by some is the actual metabolites of a probiotic, like butyric acid, for example, is a metabolite, short-chain fatty acid metabolite of probiotics that has some very specific beneficial effects on the gut. And sometimes people refer to those as postbiotics. But in either case, we can all agree that they are not live probiotics anymore. They may be the same strain, but they have been killed. Like, kind of like zombie probiotic, but whatever. That's the difference.
Right. So I want to take the pro and post. You led me right into that, because the post is basically the generally accepted definition is that, and here I'll just read the definition. It's a postbiotic is a preparation of inanimate microorganisms and or their components that confers a health benefit on the host. This is the generally accepted definition. Go. So, and for sure, I've seen tons of postbiotics and strains with research, real clinical data showing support in specific areas. So, for whatever reason, that's what they looked at. So, in terms of talking about health benefits, we'll get more into that as we get into particular indications and different strains, but it covers the whole gambit in terms of strains, whether it's probiotic, postbiotic in those cases, that can deliver the same benefit in mental wellness or digestive health, immune support, whatever, vaginal health, etc. It goes on and on. So again, the postbiotics, that's the difference between postbiotic and a probiotic. And of course, if you have a postbiotic, you have a lot less limitation on dosage format for innovation.
Oh yeah,
So you can go
very
into
easy to formulate with.
very easy to formulate with. You can go right into a tablet. And again, the strain is important. Okay, you got to look at the research associated with that particular strain. So not the genus species. And actually, this is kind of your indicator when you go look on the label for a probiotic product or whatever, and you see a bunch of strains, genus species there. What I call commodity biotics. Okay, that are generic biotics with no strain designation. Well, okay, those are not the ones that really have any research on them. But yeah, there's probably a lot of research in terms of the benefit of the genus species. But you really got to look at the strain and dig into that to see that benefit there. Okay, let's round up the last couple things here. So prebiotics, right? So Gene, when I say prebiotic, what's the first thing you think of on a prebiotic? I think most consumers think this. What do you think?
Oh, I think of something that is going to feed the probiotic to help it grow and be healthy. And I think of some of the first ones on the market were like inulin, and the fructooligosaccharides that contain that fructooligosaccharides. And of course now the sky's the limit. There are so many different compounds that have prebiotic properties out there, just a whole lot.
Yep, they are. And you're right. It's more than just the traditional thing. And I think most people think of, okay, the prebiotic is feeding the probiotic. Maybe in the combination of the product you're giving, but could also be standalone prebiotic. There are companies that have a lot of research just on prebiotic.
That's right.
Showing benefits in different indications. So think about that for a minute. What are they doing? Well, they're actually working whatever probiotics are in your gut microbiota to deliver that benefit. And it's clearly having an impact. I've seen a lot of research in this area.
Oh, a lot of research. I would even go so far as to say, it might be a controversial thought, but I think a good prebiotic can have more value because, you don't have to worry that it's getting there intact. It doesn't need to be intact per se. It just needs to feed the probiotic, and it allows your body to feed and nurture its own internal microbiome. And I think that is just vitally important. And I've seen amazing things happen when people have used a good prebiotic supplement on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I take one that's very good with tons of research on it as well. That's clearly delivers the benefit. So that's what prebiotic. So, but then the next definition of is synbiotic. Okay, that means what you already said: prebiotic and probiotic together. Syn meaning synergy. So the two working together. The traditional synbiotic, I think, is prebiotic and probiotic together. Okay, that's fine.
That's the traditional one.
That's the traditional. However, I think it's important to point out that there are other components. I would argue that, and this probably definition will change as it goes on, but the definition that's accepted today is that it's a mixture comprising a live organism and a substrate, which is the prebiotic, right? Like inulin fiber or the GOS or something like that, galacto-oligosaccharides, right? That are selectively utilized by the host microorganism, okay, which again confer a health benefit. So, however, I think that it could be, I would argue a synbiotic is also, maybe someone's going to get mad at me for saying this, but it could also be a prebiotic and a botanical, or it could be a prebiotic and a postbiotic. To me, it's a syn.
Absolutely.
And if you've got the research to support that, showing the benefit for that particular combination, that for me that's pretty important there. So again, synbiotics
I agree.
Yeah. So that's probiotics, postbiotics, prebiotics, and synbiotics. We're talking about there. And again, numerous indications. And I'm going to wrap up this first introduction to the series with that. And by dispelling dispelling some common myths for probiotics. Okay, so let's think about this, because it's good to think about from an innovation standpoint or whatever. So I think we touched on this already. Is more better? Well, not necessarily. And actually, this is probably a general premise for supplements in general. More of anything seems to be better. People the common sense thing, or not common sense, I would say, says, okay, if I take more of this, it's going to be better for me. No, probably not. Okay, there's a reason. There's research for a particular dosage that says you should do that. So, so in other words, in this case, larger CFU number, does that mean it equates with enhanced benefits? Well, not unless they show the research for that. And even particular strains, I've seen studies on different dosages for that particular strain showing different benefits. So yes, there could be additional benefits of that, but again, you got to go back to the research, look at the strain. And so here's the other myth: are a greater number of strains better? It's like if you have multiple strains, is that better? Again, we already said it depends on the science. Okay. Got to go to the science.
On the science,
and
that makes me crazy. That makes me crazy. I go into a pharmacy or a store, and you see this, and I remember going to a pharmacy, and just out of curiosity, asking the pharmacist, "So, which probiotic do you recommend?" And he's like, "This one. It has all these strains." And I'm like, "Yeah, but there's only one of them there at a clinically relevant dose." He's like, "What?" You see that all the time. It's like if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, you baffle them with bull. Well, Anyway, you just put a bunch of stuff in there, and kitchen sink approach, everything but the kitchen sink. Yeah. It's not science.
I think these types of ingredients, biotics in general, more complex than botanicals in terms of if I think take a single botanical, which has a benefit for a certain area, like St. John's wort for mild depression, let's say. Okay, there's multiple components in there, but the research is kind of targeted in a specific area. Biotics, it's very complex. The number of variables, I don't know, maybe I need to consult ChatGPT to calculate the number of statistical possibilities for different combinations. It's got to be astronomical. So you got to start somewhere, when you're innovating. Start with strains that have the research and stuff like that. And again, does strain specificity matter? Not all genus species are the same. It depends on the strain and the research and the science. So you have to really look at that. And the other one is, do probiotics have to alter my microbiota to be effective? Well, that's a common misconception.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right. It doesn't.
Somehow you're taking this is going to affect your gut microbiota. Well, yes and no. That's only part of it. So, it's much more complex in terms of the science here. So that's all we're going to say. But we're going to dig more into each of these categories in future parts of the series, and we'll talk about even some specific research. Really cool stuff out there, Gene, especially in the mental wellness area. Yeah,
fascinating area.
The mental wellness area I was focused on. Multiple strains with for cognitive, sleep, stress, mood. These are all kind of overlapping.
They got a name for it, Psychobiotics.
Yeah, Psychobiotics. Yeah. I think people think it's like psycho,
makes you crazy. No, it's like psychological. It's Psychobiotics. Yeah.
Yes, I got it. All right, so we're gonna wrap that up. Let's move on to our next topic, and boom.
Yep. So, our next topic is what is for me an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah.
And that is the question of, is there a difference between real science and what I like to call marketing science? Obviously, it's a loaded question. Obviously, the answer is yes, there's a difference. But the real issue here is understanding the difference when you see it, all right? And so the simple thing is, look, some products, are formulated by real scientists, by people who understand what the research shows and puts together a good product that can actually do you some good. And other products are created by people who don't necessarily have that background and are basing their formulations on marketing science. In other words, this is what's hot now, let me toss it in the formula. This is hot, let me toss it in the formula. I'm not sure what to do. One of the funniest ones I've seen is if you look at thyroid support products, You can go out there and search them. It's a fun little exercise. And search as many as you can and start comparing them. You'll find it becomes evident real quick that people are copying everybody else's formula. And very seldom do you see too many differences. They just copy one after the other, and they make the same mistakes. For instance, one of the things I see in a lot of thyroid formulas is they'll put manganese in there, despite the fact that research shows that people with hypothyroid conditions tend to have higher levels of manganese, so you don't want to give them more, and yet they put that in the formula. Because they're consistently just copying it and not doing the research. You see it over and over again. And worse, just creating products that don't have clinically relevant doses of nutraceuticals in there, or just the wrong nutraceuticals entirely, just because it's popular or they think it's going to sell. Now, so how can you tell? How can you tell if a product is based on real science?
That's the $1 million question there, man.
Yeah, it's not a super easy answer, but I'll tell you. I mean, if it's somebody like me or Bill, it's a different situation because we can kind of pick it up, look at the supplement facts box, and have a sense of. We can't tell you for sure if what it says on the label is in there, but we can at least say, okay, here's something. If it's labeled correctly, we can see if it has sufficient amounts of something that's likely to have the effect. But, so if I was talking to consumers, I'd give them one type of advice. But since we're primarily talking to industry here, here's what I'll say. If you're a retailer, you need to go back to your supplier and you need to ask them the questions. All right, you're showing me this formula. This looks great. What science do you have on it? Not just a sell sheet that says, hey, this is great. Here's what you can say. Do you have some science? Can you share that science with me? Do you have something that demonstrates that this is actually going to do what it's supposed to do at the doses and in the forms given? So the onus is upon you as the retailer to question your supplier and make sure they're providing you with the right stuff. Yes, I encourage all of you to do some of your own research, even if you don't have a science background. You can still go on and you can still look and see. And please don't just look at some article that you Google something and it's on somebody's website and it says something that doesn't make it so.
No. It
take
doesn't.
a moment. Look. See if you know somebody who does have a science background that you could talk to. Get brave and go to PubMed and do some searches and see if you can find something. See if there's any data that supports what you have. Now, I can give you some ideas, too, about what to look for. Now, one of the dirty little secrets in our industry, and it's a dirty little secret because it's not always true, which makes it even more difficult. But I'm sure you've all picked up a bottle and seen a proprietary blend. And the proprietary blend may be called proprietary blend, or it may be called immune support blend, or whatever blend. And the problem is that a lot of times people who are creating a product want to put stuff in there that is going to get consumers excited. Like, let's say they say, well, lion's mane is hot right now for cognitive health, so I want to put lion's mane in there. But I'm going to put this in here and I'm going to put that in there. It's going to become too expensive. I still want lion's mane to appear. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take some expensive ingredients and maybe even some inexpensive ingredients, and I'm going to toss them in a proprietary blend. And let's say, for the sake of argument, you know that there's been good research on lion's mane at 1,000 milligrams for a specific extract. Mm-hmm. But you see a proprietary blend that has 300 milligrams of 5 different things or 10 different things. Well, it can't possibly have the clinically relevant dose of lion's mane
unless they did the research on the blend. That's a different story.
Unless they did the research on the blend.
Or the product.
And if they did
itself.
The research on the blend or the product, and if they did that, they should be singing that song from the rooftops.
Exactly.
And letting everybody know, we have done a clinical study on our final product.
Or
on this blend.
That's our industry for years. Ingredient suppliers would do the research. That's great. And then marketers, right? They'd sell the ingredients to CDMOs and they private label that, they market it up, whatever. but you got to pull back the curtain there and get into the dosages and that sort of thing. And of course, in a proprietary blend, you're not going to know that. So
you're not going to know that.
yeah,
Caveat emptor, buyer beware. If it says proprietary blend, now if you ask a company, they'll say, "Well, we're just trying to protect our intellectual property. We don't want somebody to just copy us." Maybe, but I got to tell you, in my experience, the overwhelming vast majority of the time, that's not the real reason. The real reason is you're not putting in the right stuff at the right amounts, so you're gonna hide. Don't pay any attention to that man behind the curtain.
yeah,
That's what's going on in most cases. Yeah, and so be very careful about that. Also, if you see, and that's one of the ways you can also tell let me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me do a different question. How can you tell if what it says on the label is really in the product? Well, you can't, basically, but there are some telltale signs. If you look at a product and it gives you a certain number of milligrams of materials, and it's in a capsule, let's say. A tablet, it could be all kinds of different sizes and shapes. Powders, you could adjust the dose. But in a capsule, it's kind of fixed. So in most cases, not all, but in most cases, you're either going to get a double zero capsule or a single zero capsule. And it's kind of all over the board on how much you could fit in there.
yeah.
But if you want a kind of rule of thumb, it's not accurate all the time. You can probably fit up to 500 milligrams in a single zero and up to let's say 700 milligrams. Yeah, 750 in a double zero. So if your dose is 2 capsules, okay, and they're double zero capsules, right? And if you're not sure, Google it and you can see, they'll show you what the size looks like. You can see comparison. And you say, oh, well, the dose is 2 capsules. So at the most, using the Bill and Jean rule of thumb of say 750 per capsule, that's going to be 1,500 milligrams. If you add up everything on the label and it says you're getting 2,000 milligrams, it's probably not in there.
Well, and don't forget, you have flow agents, that sort of thing, that are added to.
Absolutely, so that's the excipients Bill's talking about.
Yeah.
So you could have flow agents, you could have fillers, you could have all kinds of different materials that might be in there that add to
that's
the total
fine.
weight.
That's fine, but whatever's on the label needs to be actually how much of that's actually in there. So that's the rule of thumb for that. The other thing, I have a couple things to add to this is that I did a lot of due diligence on companies for potential acquisition targets, and get to your point, to really, on the surface it looked like, oh, these guys have got the science, right? And you go to their website or whatever, but then as soon as you start digging into it, and again, pulling back the curtain, and then I more times than not, the science isn't there to support the claims. Because you go back and look at the product, you look at the supplement facts. I go right to that. I look at the, like you, Gene. We look at it right away and say, okay, looks like it could be legit. We need to go a little deeper here. So, in these cases, it was people are using borrowed science. Okay, well, that's historically in our industry, people are doing that. So they're replicating what somebody else has done and putting it in there and making the claims, but they're presenting it as if they've actually done the research. And the reality is they haven't. So you really have to, I'm probably a harder consumer to sell to than the average consumer out there for supplements, because I'm going to dig back into it. And
you and me both.
And I'll go, hey guys, I remember several companies I looked at first pass, I said, no, this is BS, man. This is not.
You see it all the time.
Too many times.
And so the best advice I can give retailers out there is, if you have somebody in your life who's got a science background in the dietary supplement business, that's somebody that you want to be able to talk to on a frequent basis and ask some questions to, or just try to get yourself as educated as possible so you know what to ask. But one of the things that pops up, again, we're talking a lot about studies, and you want to see raw material companies do their own studies. You want to see finished good companies do their own studies.
Sure.
But at least raw material companies, so that if a finished good company says, I want to create a product, I want to use these raw materials, I'm going to use the ones that have already had studies on them showing effectiveness, so at least you got a better shot that your product is likely to work. But what kind of studies? Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Bill and I are going to give you a little what kind of studies 101 crash course here. So there's different kinds of studies. The gold standard is the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. There's also open-label trials.
Which is the pharmaceutical model, the double-blind
Which
placebo.
is the pharmaceutical model, right?
Yeah.
There's in vitro, in vivo. So let's just sort of define a little of these.
Mm-hmm.
So double-blind, just in case you don't know, what that means is in the study, the person taking the product doesn't know if they're getting that product or something else, a placebo. They don't know which one they're getting. And the person giving it to them doesn't know which one they're giving them. Okay? Somebody up the food chain knows. They've got it designated as product A and product B, and product B is the real one and product A is the placebo, whatever. But they don't know. So that means you're eliminating a bias. You're eliminating somebody thinking, like the guy giving you the product gives you a little wink and you're like, oh, I actually have the real one, whatever. No, that can't happen because, they don't know what they're getting. You don't know what you're getting. All right. Now, placebo is just that. It's a kind of a blank tablet. They'll put some inert substance in it, some cellulose or sugar or something like that, and it's not real. But it's done in a study because what you want to do is if you just do what's called an open label study, which is a good place to start sometimes. But then comes the question, would the person have gotten the same effect if they just took a placebo? Because there is a placebo effect. A person believes something is going to have an effect, and they take it, and their body generates an effect. Now, the placebo effect won't last as long. It can last a short period of time, and then it stops. Okay, whether the body eventually goes, "Hey, wait a minute, this isn't real," or whatever, it stops.
Yeah,
but that's why we do that, so that you have something to compare it against, and that is and then a randomized is just. You're taking your group of, say, 100 subjects and using a method to randomly determine this person's going to be the placebo group, that person's going to be the intervention group, and you just randomly do that as opposed to pick and choose people to be in a certain group. So that's your randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. The open label is just that. You know what you're getting, you're taking it, and it's being assessed. That does have some value, but it's not as strong a position to take as the gold standard.
All right.
Epidemiological basically is a population study. All right. So you may be looking at large groups, which is helpful. And sometimes epidemiological studies are just looking at, let's say you're looking at
trends.
Zinc. Yeah. So you're looking at zinc content, and so you're taking you're having people take dietary surveys and say, based on what they're eating, they should be getting about this amount of zinc. And you look at different trends and say, okay, the people in this quintile, this group who ate these foods got the most amount of zinc, and therefore, according to what we're looking at, they had better prostate health, let's say. And so they're looking at those kinds of relationships. And they are relationships. They're not necessarily always causal. You can't say that caused the benefit or caused the problem, but you can see that there is a correlation.
Well, that
has some value too.
Yeah, I mean, another great example of that is the Mediterranean diet that's been going on for decades. People observe populations that are eating those types of foods, and it's definitely showing benefits for cardiovascular health or whatever, that sort of thing. So that's actually valuable as well.
It is.
And
it's very valuable.
Very valuable. And so it depends. In our industry, I'd say most people are focused on, the clinical research in a double-blind fashion, I'd say, if we're doing that. But now it's different for supplements. These aren't drugs. We're not trying to prove it. And then also broadening those populations. A lot of times in the double-blind, right, you have a narrow population, like it's just men aged 30 to 45 or something, or it's, as an example, right? But there needs to be more on the general population, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you got to factor in diet, other things, cultural differences, things like that can have an impact as well. It depends on what it is.
That's right.
Not always, by the way. Biochemistry is
And that's why if you're doing
yeah,
if you're putting together a good study, one of the things you look for is to eliminate confounding factors to the extent that you can. So let's say you're doing a study on mood health, on depression or something, and you want and somebody has a group has mild depression. You might want to say, well, is this supplement, is this herb going to help? Well, you might choose a population that isn't already using any dietary supplements for cognitive health or for mood health. You want to say, okay, if you already are doing that, I'm not going to include you in the study because that could impact the results, and we may get a false positive or false negative because of that. And so that's one of the other things that'll take place. Now, you may have heard the terms in vitro and in vivo before, just so you understand. In vitro, when you hear it's an in vitro study, sometimes referred to as a lab study, that basically means it's a cell line study. It's in a petri dish, or sometimes called a test tube study. And this has value, but you have to be careful what you're looking at. This is a study where they're taking a cell line, sometimes a manufactured cell line that is very specific, like this is a cell line that's likely to get cancer, this is a cell line that's likely to have this effect, or whatever, and you're introducing a nutraceutical into it to see a certain effect. Now, that has value, particularly in the case of you want to see if it's going to have a certain mechanism of action. This is anti-inflammatory. Why is it anti-inflammatory? So you look at it and you start measuring different things. Oh, look, it's decreasing C-reactive protein. So we can see that's its mechanism of action, or whatever. And so that's good for that. But again, you have to look at the broader scope. For example, you can also do an in vitro study that's poorly designed. I'll give you a great example. Years ago, you may recall that magnesium stearate as an excipient was popularized, or I should say demonized, to be bad for immune health. And it was largely based on the results of a study, an in vitro study in cell lines, where they said, look at this, given to these cells, it actually caused a reduction in immune response. Oh, that sounds terrible. You don't want to take that. Only to discover that the cell line used was incapable of metabolizing magnesium stearate, unlike most cells in the body, which has no problem metabolizing magnesium stearate.
Right.
And if you looked at other studies where they used magnesium stearate, they found no such evidence of that. In fact, stearic acid itself actually has some immune benefits. So that was a poorly designed one. And then in vivo meaning life, means in a live organism.
Right.
It could be a worm, it could be an animal, it could be a human. So that's a little crash course in those things. And it's about, part of it's trust. In who do you trust? If you're buying raw materials from a company you trust, that's great. Are you buying finished goods from a company that you trust? Do they have a reputation of doing it right? Are they trustworthy? Or is there a lot of issues out there? That's one of the things you need to consider. Any additional thoughts to add on this? I mean, there's so much we could talk about here, but I don't belabor the point.
Well, not really, except I'll just make a point of just kind of a little bit of a reveal of something I've been working on here. So I think we'll wrap up our show here, because we're at the time.
Is it a new karaoke song? No, just checking.
Yeah, well, it was my birthday on Saturday, so we had the karaoke party here at the house. That was fun. So it was a late night, 3 to 4 in the morning. It was a lot of fun.
Party animal Bill.
Yeah, I never do that, man. Okay, so need a lot of good supplements to recover the next day. Anyway, so let's wrap it up, Gene. That was great. And we could go on, like you said, we could go about marketing science, real science. I'm sure we'll do that in the future as well. Again, folks, just send us your questions, topics you'd like to hear about, that sort of thing. And don't forget, we're streaming everywhere. You can take us with you, which is very cool. So you don't have to sit necessarily in front of your computer watching LinkedIn Live. In fact, the post-produced show actually has captions, so that's kind of nice. Eventually, when the software has the capability, I'm going to do it in Spanish, which I've had a lot of requests for that actually. And so eventually we'll have both English and Spanish, I think, captions in our post-produced shows. The last thing I'm going to leave you guys with is I did a post yesterday. If you didn't see it, go see it. I did a little bit of a reveal. My birthday, 4/20/20/2024, is actually a palindromic number and sequence. If and reverse that, it's actually the same. So very good. And actually, I consulted Chat GPT. So this has to go back to our first episode topic of some artificial intelligence. Guys, it's a brilliant tool to use for so many applications, and it can have monumental impact on our industry. So go read what I wrote about that yesterday. And something I've been working on since 2018, and that is going to revolutionize this industry in a way that you haven't seen before in terms of research and the consumer experience. So that's all I'm going to tell you, but you can follow the innovation journey here as I reveal the different parts as it happens over the next weeks and months.
Let me just add one thing. Speaking of which, my last issue of the Vitamin Professor, a free newsletter that that you can subscribe to on LinkedIn, I just review different studies that are done every couple of weeks. And one of the studies I did, it was kind of the first one that I saw of this. You see a lot of vision studies, but I thought this was particularly interesting. It was done on presbyopia, which is basically farsightedness. What most people who wear glasses as they get older is because they can't see
the reading glasses
good close up.
Right.
Yeah. This study was actually done on people with presbyopia or near or farsightedness. And there was 3 herbs that were used, and they actually found some really, really good results in improving vision. And they conclude with the fact that this could be something that could help eliminate the need for corrective lenses. Whether or not it will, I thought that was particularly interesting. So, feel free to check that out.
And actually, there's a biotic with showing a benefit for eye health, which you would never think. Some clinical research in that.
Never think.
Yep. So I've seen that actually. So anyway, lots of cool stuff out there, guys. We're going to wrap it up, and we'll see you on the next show coming up in a couple weeks here. And again, reach out to us with any questions or comments and stuff like that. Appreciate it. Take care.